That's a good segue into 13 Lives. How did you go about prepping for the film? I mean, how familiar were you with the actual event of the Thai soccer team and their coach being trapped in an underground cave for 18 days? And what were those conversations like with Ron Howard getting ready for the film?
Well, Joaquin, I was vaguely familiar. I knew the boys had been trapped in a cave. I didn't know any of the real details. I knew the outcome. My wife followed it closer than I did. I was busy working, and when I work, I kind of get very single-minded on the project that I'm on. And that was at the time I was on Hillbilly Elegy. We were wrapping that film up, so I had a lot to do there. And so when Ron presented me with the script, we were still on Hillbilly Elegy, and he goes, "Excuse me, take a listen." Ron presented me, he goes, "Take a listen, take a a read through, not a listen, but take a read through and page through this script and tell me what you think." And once I read Bill Nicholson's script, my mind was blown. A, because I didn't know all the intricate details of what had to go to make for a successful, miraculous rescue mission across those 18 days. And then and B, it felt very much like the kind of story that Ron intrinsically just knocks out of the park. I mean, that combination of the two. I thought, oh, and of course, I was going to do it. I mean, I love working with him. So that wasn't even a question. So once I got into all these details, I was like, oh my God, like now it's time to start prepping for this. And I looked at a lot of documentaries that were out there, anything that was known about the actual people and the event that had happened. Nat Geo had done a documentary, and then I got a hold of transcripts of interviews from all the real people that were involved. So I understood who they kind of were as a person, and I had some idea of the real events versus what was drama, and how to really balance that out. And so and there was another movie that had been made over in Thailand, and I saw that, and then finally got an English version of it. I tried to just watch it to see if I could flow and follow it. And also I was trying to tune my ear to the Thai language, because so much of that script, the first 10, 11 pages of it, and then the movie, the first 10 and a half minutes of it is in Thai. And then there's a brief exchange in English and another 4.5 minutes of it in Thai. And then there's Thai that's spoken intermittently throughout. So that was a big thing too, trying to find someone in the Thai community to bring on board. I was not successful with that. I was going to cut it originally in New York, found some people, but then the movie shifted to London. We have producers in London, or from London, that gave us some great incentives and tax rebates that we could help with the production of everything. So that ended up happening. And my prep just basically became like, learn as much as you can about this story, and start thinking of ways that you could put it together. And I think about things and how to put it together, but I don't lock in until you see the material. And then once we got the material, we were shooting such heavy volumes because we shot in Australia and I was cutting in London. And we were shooting with the idea that we wouldn't want to do any pickups. So the film probably was overshot, but needed. We're still shooting in the pandemic era. And so we were able to get through our entire shoot without any COVID cases in Australia. And then we were going to go to Thailand after that and shoot for an additional 5 or 7 days. But they had a massive outbreak, so we couldn't do that. And then, I was in London, and it just all the dailies started coming in, and I just started cutting. And again, Simon, my assistant, had a system down for how we were going to translate the material, because he had worked with Ron and Dan Hanley before on Rush, and Rush has some elements of international language in it. So he understood, okay, we weren't able to hire anyone from the Thai community. So we then devised where it was phonetically broken down. And then also he used Google Translator. And it's amazing how when you're working on a film or a project in another language you're not familiar with, how your ear becomes to adapt to the cadence of what you're listening to. And I asked lots of other editors. I even asked Monty, like, what was it like on Narcos? How did you figure this out? And we we didn't have a you on this project. Because it's really tricky. There's feminine and masculine deliveries of stuff, and then like the pauses. if you interrupt the pause in the dialogue, does it shift the meaning? Does it change the cadence? Would they not naturally speak that way? So there was a lot to be gleaned from that. And I just started cutting it. And then Simon went through and brilliantly subcapped every one of the takes. Because if there were improvs or any ad libs going on, I could go, okay, I know what this character said up to this point. This is a little different. And I'm just going to ride with it. Looks like it feels like emotionally. I know it's an ad lib of some sort. I'll try and make the cleanest cut that I can. And then we'll go from there. And once I got about maybe, I'd say about 10, 15 minutes of Thai cut together, we brought in a translator just to get a gauge on how we were doing as a whole and if we needed to proceed on that route or if we were completely messing it up. And she came in, she saw several scenes, and she was so moved by the material itself. She's Thai, of course. And so she was very, very familiar with the story, wasn't off-put with the way that we were telling the story, and was really pretty comfortable with the accuracy of my cutting in Thai. And Simon would go through and just adjust frames here or there and then readjust the subcaps on it. And that became sort of the template for how we got through it all.
No, that sounds very interesting. And I mean, it just sounds like a very elaborate, logistical setup. I mean, from production to post, I mean, like, it's not even just about here, like, talking about editing. I mean, you're talking about finding translators. I mean, production is shooting on these elaborate sets, and I'm sure they have to break them down, and you have to look at the dailies and tell Ron, hey, okay, we have everything or not, or, there's so many things. And they're in Australia, you're in London.
You know what, Joaquin? I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the biggest pressures that I felt under was to go through all the material, to be able to say, at my point of view, I think we're good, or we are not good. And there was a lot of we are not good here. And there's a very specific thing that happened. Viggo Mortensen went to Ron and asked him if he could do his own stunts. Now, it was news to Ron, because he's like, wait, what? We're not set up for that. And they'll change the shooting schedule. And he doesn't know if Viggo's like certified to do this, if it's safe, or any of those things like that. So eventually Ron agreed to do it, but Colin also was on board with it, which then meant Joel Edgerton, Tom Bateman, Paul Gleason, and all those principal divers had to do their own stunts. So what you see in the film is a solid 90% of it, because the ramifications of when we were first using the stunt doubles, I quickly saw that when I cut some of those scenes, because we cut that before we got the sort of green light that Viggo was now going to come on and start doing his own stunts. So one of the things I quickly discovered was, hey, we're not ever going to be able to make this feel authentic because we can't see the stunt doubles' faces. Face replacements underwater, I don't know if it's successful or not, but we weren't set up for that either, budgetarily or time-wise. We didn't have scans of these guys' faces to map different stuff. And it just wouldn't have worked anyway, because there's too many specific emotional moments, too many physical moments, too many things going on with the props, the interactions with the kids. So it was a blessing that I would send these cuts to Ron and go, I don't think we have what we need here early on. And that really helped unlock the key idea that, these guys are going to have to do a majority of their own stunts. And from that point on, that's what made a lot of the underwater storytelling completely believable.
Wow. Yeah, no, I mean, that's like you said, I mean, and that just opens up then another maybe another logistical nightmare, maybe, right? And having to change schedules and sets and all these, getting certifications. I mean, so many things involved in this filmmaking process. I'm always amazed.
Yeah, and having to send cuts to him, he's already working 6 and 7 days a week, 12 and 14 hours a day. When's he going to get sleep? And then I'm tapping him on his shoulder from London in Australia. Please look at this. Can you look at this? Just find a way to look at this and just give me some notes and thoughts on it. And he would always do that. But it really helped us get going. And that was a lot of pressure on me to be able to go through that, because we had hours and hours and hours and hours of underwater footage. In total, we ended up on that whole film with 382 hours of film. And by the way, a lot of it very, very usable. It's just, what do we need to tell?
Yeah, exactly. What's the best parts to pick? Well, speaking of those underwater sequences, I have a question here from a member of the Hollywood Editing Mentor community, Maggie Chan. She's asked, how did you pace the long panic-inducing underwater sequences?
Well, there are 7 dives in total. So in my philosophy of storytelling. When you're revisiting an event like that, you have to have a different perspective and point of view on why you're doing it this way as opposed to the way before. Because never did I want the audience as a philosophy to feel like once you saw the first boys brought out or saw the divers reach the first boys and they were brought out, that it would be an automatic thing that the same procedure would work throughout the rest of the dives. And each dive has its own intention. And within its own intention, I usually went through the point of view of that particular diver or that dive team as to how we shot it. It would be close-ups on the face, a lot of over-shoulder coverage, direct POVs, so that each one of those divers, because Joel Edgerson's character, Dr. Harry, he came on board later, along with Jason Mallinson and the other diver, they came on board later. So it was important that they get a sense of how difficult this is going to be. Vigo's character and Colin's character were the first to go in and find the boys, as it happened in real life. And so it was strictly through their point of view. And I think that never really kind of got old at all. And then the pacing of it, after laying out all the parts, which equaled a 5.5-hour movie, here's one of the things that just came to me deeply into cut downs of the movie, going from 5-hour movie to 4.5 to 4 to 3 and change, that kind of thing. You know, Joaquin, we talked about news, and this was one of the biggest news stories in the world. So eventually I just took a journalistic approach and said, everything that's not helping us is hurting us. Every scene that doesn't help us, it's in our way. And so this is a film, because it's so dense with the storytelling and so many events that you won't believe. If we just go in and isolate those events, it will be so much easier and compelling, with no dead time of this happened and then this happened and that led us to this point in the film. And now here's this consequence, and so many twists and turns. There was enough of that generally in the film for us to deliver what we did in the end.
And how did, I guess, sound play a part in this through editorial? And then how did that evolve into the mix, you know, creating this claustrophobia? Obviously, diving in those caves. I mean, I can't even imagine that feeling. But how do you create that, I guess, also with sound?
Yeah, well, you know, this is a unique world that people are going into, underwater cave diving. Very few people in the world, even certified divers, have ever experienced this type of diving. So there's an opportunity there for the audience to learn something and sense something about what this mission may have been like, how risky it had been. And so when our very first meeting with the sound team, we were all on board with how we were going to approach it, that sonically it was going to be just as important as what we were seeing visually. So it was baked into the whole plan of, we would never get to the stage afterwards and decide to discover or play around or experiment with what we could do sonically. It was all mic'd for a certain way for sound. And I always felt like, since we had this thing, that this story that was a real event, with so much knowledge about it, the last thing we wanted to do is come in and make a Hollywood version of it and be sentimental or manipulative or anything like that. So we just said, tell the story. And part of telling the story was with the divers and the boys' experience, the quiet, the loneliness in the cave for the boys and their coach, you know, hearing trickles of water, mounting water across all the monsoon rain days as it eventually leaked and crept into the cave. And then that became their biggest threat near the end. It was what the divers had to go through, the breathing, you know, from the experienced divers to the Navy SEALs, the Thai Navy SEAL divers, who you could see the subtle differences between the guys who do this all the time, how calm their breathing was, and how accelerated the breathing became for the Thai Navy SEAL guys who were more trained in open water. So we needed sonically to show those contrasts. And then it's just because it was such a weird underwater feeling and vibe, I just felt like, you know, every time I used score in the beginning, as I was experimenting with it in my cuts early on, it just would spit itself back out. And finding the right piece of score that didn't really feel manipulative or take over or repetitious. And at one point we went to the idea of, we knew we were going to make a film that was going to feel very claustrophobic. And so I had some horror tracks that I was using. And most of them were just way too intentional. And I thought, okay, you got to pull that back. Until eventually I started stripping everything out of the movie, music wise, score wise, until our composer came on board. And then we had a lot of elaborate discussions with him about spotting where music would be needed and what type of sound and how subtle we would be and how overt we would be. So it all started with the first dive that Vigo and Colin go in when they find the boys on day 10. I said no music because I want the audience to feel like what it is those divers experienced when their tanks are scraping, when they bang their heads on stalactites, with their knuckles and hands being scraped and all cut up, and all the various sounds that are attached to that. So you could get a real firsthand experience for the audience, and it imparts in their brain this is not going to be easy. It's incredibly, incredibly dangerous. And then conversely with the boys, just hearing those trickles and drops of water and everything like that that would happen, just further underserved to point out their loneliness and how desperate and impossible the mission was. And you asked me earlier about prep, and Ron has a theme for each one of his movies that helps us all across all the departments, all the heads of the department, frame up the perspective of the movie. And this one was The Anatomy of a Miracle. So I just kept reflecting on that. This is not only one miracle, it's 13 of them, 13 plus, because all the divers have to get out safely as well. And unfortunately, one of them didn't make it out. And then another one died later from some blood disease or something that he had contracted, they believe, in the cave.